Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Cage Warriors. I'm your host Chris, and today we're going to be talking about Cage Warriors 172, which took place in Newcastle and will for sure go down as one of the best cards this year. Obviously, we don't know what's coming in the future, but for now it's the best card of the year. 12 fights, 11 finishes, 7 first round finishes, body shot KOs, submissions aplenty, and just in general, just such a fantastic card. A great main event with a title on the line, loads of prospects getting the job done. A lot of debuting fighters as well, also looking good in their first ever fights. So we're going to talk about all of it as we always do, but we'll start where we always do, and that's with the main event, which was between Orlando Wilson Prins and Harry Hardwick for the vacant featherweight championship. So before we get into the fight, I think it's worth shouting about the fact that this is one of those rare instances where short notice replacement actually improves a title fight. I wasn't too familiar with the previous opponent for Hardwick here, which was Zafar Mohsen. I'd watched a few fights after the fight was announced, and I'd seen a bit of him. But when it was announced that Milad Hadi had pulled out, and then that Zafar Mohsen had pulled out, and they put this fight together between Orlando Wilson Prins and Harry Hardwick, I think it dramatically improved the title fight. At least from my perspective, from someone who has watched Orlando Wilson Prins and properly enjoys watching him fight as well. I think he's super underrated. A well balanced mixed martial artist. Had a tricky start, but then rattled off 2 wins in a row. Excels on the ground, but has a good crisp jab and a decent enough gas tank. But that's something that Hardwick said he was going to exploit was the gas tank of Orlando Wilson Prins, and we'll talk about that shortly. With Harry, though, I don't think he needs any introduction. Last year, he won my 2023 Finish of the Year award for the Yellow Gloves podcast, and that was against an undefeated fighter in Vitor Estevam as well. Hardwick's just been well overdue a crack at gold. He was supposed to fight Harilla, which I believe was going to be for the interim belt. There's rumors of him fighting Paul Hughes as well at one point, but here we are now. Harry Hardwick finally gets his due and a fight that he certainly deserved. And what a fight it was for Harry Hardwick. I think to call it a career best performance might be a little disrespectful to other great performances he's had, but to do it when the lights are brightest, when there's a belt on the line, I think Harry Hardwick was just otherworldly good in this fight. Round one, I scored it a 10-8. The left jab to the head to the body, it was landing early. The shifting uppercut into the left hand, the stance switching. I think at one point, I even tweeted this. I said Hardwick's pressure is melting Orlando Wilson Prins. Double left jab, switches stances, double right hand jab, big knee to the body. The guy was just mixing everything together and doing it in combination, right? It's like jab, jab, switch, jab, jab. Like he was not keeping he was just constantly keeping his foot on the gas against Prins. He's tagging him up with that left hand and the shifting right to the body. I mean, the body shot is mental, and we always call George like the body snatcher, and Harry's equally as much of a body snatcher in my opinion. Some of the work he was doing in this fight was insane. The pace of it, I was tired just watching it. In between rounds, between the first round and the second round, I tweeted that I don't know how much Orlando Wilson Prince has left, but it feels like this second round will be his last. And even as someone who respects Orlando, who has watched him fight, who enjoys watching him fight, I think it was very evident from the minute that Harry Hardwick started pressing forward that Prince had no answer. I can't even remember him shooting for a takedown. Prince maybe dropping for a single leg. He was just bamboozled and just outclassed, outmatched. Hardwick was faster, just an unbelievable performance. Second round, right hook and then left hook to the head, dips to the body with the left hand. He was just melting Prince against the fence. And that's one of the great things about the Hardwick brothers. And, I'm going to try as much as possible to not keep bringing George into it and talking about the Hardwick brothers because I think Harry deserves his shine independently. One of the great things that Harry does is with his footwork, right? Like once he has you pinned on the cage, like that V step, he's not letting you move to the left or to the right without him already being a step ahead of you. And it's constant, constant, just onslaught of strikes. It's almost like a Dustin Poirier, where like Poirier has you against the fence, and you know that the guy's insane in the pocket. He's got great variety of shots to different parts of the body. You get the same vibe with Harry, but Harry's pace is just mental. He's not trying to knock you out with one punch. He's trying to destroy you with 50 punches to the point where you just fold. There was an eye poke in the build up, and that does have to be mentioned. It's one of those instances where I don't really think that, did it contribute to the finish? I don't think so. Obviously, it's part of a sequence, but in all honesty, that's a sequence that had started in round one, and it's a sequence that felt like it never ended, where Hardwick had him near the fence and was just beating on him, elbowing him, uppercuts, jabs, everything. Yes, the eye poke's unfortunate. I don't think the fight would have been any different. Harry could have been eye poked himself, and he probably still would have got the finish. In all honesty, it just felt like one of those nights for him where anything he threw was just going to lead to a victory, really. Hardwick does drop Orlando Wilson Prins in the second round. Flurries against the cage, follows up with big shots. Prins then throws up the armbar. Hardwick sneaks out, goes back to landing big shots in Prins's guard. I just think in that moment, Prins felt like, well, if my Hail Mary armbar ain't going to work, then I'm probably fucked. And they got back to their feet. And probably my favorite sequence of the fight, which is obviously the fight ending sequence, but Orlando Wilson Prins goes for a spinning back fist, glances the chin or the cheek of Hardwick. Hardwick blows him a kiss and immediately rips two left hooks to the body, drops Orlando Wilson Prins, follows up with shots and gets the stoppage. So I just think that's a unreal level of shithousery from Harry to blow a guy a kiss, basically emoting during the fight, and then putting the boots to the man and just putting a ridiculous pace on. And those body shots are just insane, and they do add up. In 7 minutes of a fight, it felt like he'd done 5 rounds worth of damage on Prins. Prins just completely melted. And like I said, we've got a new featherweight champion, and I can't think of someone more worthy of it than Harry. He's had a longer path to gold than his brother Ish, but he's fought some really good opposition, and it's well overdue. I would have loved the Harilla fight in the past. I mean, who wouldn't? I would have loved the Paul Hughes fight as well, but this feels apt. This feels perfect. It felt special in that arena, like seeing obviously I wasn't there, but watching from the broadcast, it just felt electric in there. The atmosphere when Harry came out, the celebration when Harry got the finish, it just felt like a special night for a guy who deserves it, a guy who's put in the work, a guy who's one of the most exciting fighters on the roster, period. His pace, his variety of shots, just the guy's toolbox is so deep on the feet. And what people don't realize, and it's the same trap they fell into with George, is like these guys are ridiculously good on the ground, like great neck attackers, and they can wrestle their backsides off. So, fall in love with the striking all you want, but Harry's more than just the striking, and I think he's shown that over the years. But this might be a fight that a lot of people get introduced to Harry with, so something to keep in mind there. One question that I got online from Instagram, which I'm being really lazy and I'm not going to look at who sent it, so I'm sorry. It's easier on Twitter because I'm lazy. Um, Someone asked, what's next for Harry Hardwick, and while I hate matchmaking when someone's just had a great career moment, if I really had to think about it, I mean, I don't think it takes much thinking, right? I think there's two people and only two people, and if it's anyone other than those two people, I'm going to be pretty upset, throwing my toys out of the pram, crying, screaming. It's got to be either Jordan Vucenic or Luke Riley. I don't know how you can argue the case for anyone else. I know there's an argument for Stephen in Scotland and all of that, but I don't know. You got to make it line up, and you got to do one of those two against Harry. The argument for Vucenic is there, former champ. Feels like these guys' paths were always going to cross, so it makes sense for this to be the one. Vucenic on 3-fight win streak since coming back, and he's just been decimating people. With Luke, it's one of those where do you want to get him in a title shot before he gets to the UFC? Like, do you want to build him that way? Because Luke's well overdue a title shot, in my opinion. Like, he's had the slow build. He's beaten the fuck out of pretty much anyone he's fought. He's had 2 Fight of the Years in the same year. That pace that Luke fights at, the way that he goes to the body, the pace that Hardwick fights at, the way he goes to the body, from a pure entertainment perspective, I think that might be the better fight, and I think it would be absolute mayhem. And right now, I'd probably put my money on it being up there with the greatest fights we'll ever see in Cage Warriors if they do match those two up. Maybe the fight that's most deserving for both guys for their resumes for being able to fight people at the same caliber. I think that the Vucenic fight makes more sense right now. Be interested to see what they do. Um, but it's got to be one of those two. I'll be pretty disappointed if it's not. But for Harry Hardwick, an insane performance, a well-deserving champion at 145 pounds, someone who's active, someone who's he's got it all in my opinion. And there's a card in Newcastle on the 23rd of November, which they announced on the broadcast. And I think Cage Warriors will be looking at that card as a chance to have Harry and George defending their belts on the same card, main event, co-main event. I think that would be so fucking good. If they can hold on to both of them until then, could be that the UFC comes calling. You never know. There's a card coming up in Manchester. Someone falls out. One of these two might step in on short notice. You never know. But it feels like something special could happen on that card on the 23rd of November. But other than that, Harry Hardwick, take a bow. Tremendous performance, tremendous night for him, and just a special night in general. I cannot wait to see him fight again. For Prins, he'll be back. Probably a bit too soon for the title shot, but he's a very good fighter, and there's tons of great fights for him left at 145 pounds. So I'm sure we'll see him again too. All right, so the mayhem continues, and we'll keep working down this card. Um, so many insane moments on this card, but I don't think anything was more insane than what we saw in the James Power versus Daniel Kolasinski fight. Absolutely nuts. Quick introduction of both. If you don't know, Kolasinski making his Cage Warriors debut, 5-1 as a pro, kickboxing background, um, and quite a few finishes to boot. Quite an aggressive fighter. James Power obviously got back to winning ways this year with a win over Gianluca Rocca, which was a very decisive win. Not very entertaining, but I think one of those where he just had to get back on the horse. 6-1 as a pro, and hasn't had an easy fight since joining Cage Warriors. I don't think James Power, like, he's fought some absolute killers. Pajani he fought, and my God, that was a crazy fight. He's fought Adam Shelley as well. Like I said, he's fought Gianluca Rocca. He's had some great fights. But in this one, what we saw unfold was arguably the round, well, inarguably the round of the year. It's the best round we've seen this year, in my opinion. Um, I don't know what James Power is made of. I messaged James after the fight, and he said that Kolasinski would have needed a sledgehammer to put him out. And I honestly think he probably would have needed 2 or 3 sledgehammers, 4 arms, and maybe 6 arms with a sledgehammer in each hand. And even then, it might not have been enough to knock James Power out. Just utter insanity what we saw. Kolasinski dropped him early with the left hook, a glancing left hook, stabbed him with a straight left, followed him to the ground, landing big shots. Power somehow got back to his feet, ate an uppercut, ate a big left hand. But what was crazy was Power was eating these shots moving forward. Like, it's not like Kolasinski was just blitzing him. James Power was like, "Oh shit, you're hitting me really hard. I'm gonna keep walking, and I'm gonna keep chasing you down, and you're gonna keep hitting me, but eventually I'm gonna get you up against the fence, and I'm gonna be able to do my thing." And this is one of those rare occasions where a fighter gets dropped early, absorbs a lot of damage, and then goes on to win the round anyways, which is extremely rare. But that's what James Power did. Once he got him against the fence, we know what James Power does against the fence. He's not trying to just hold you there. Elbows over the top, digging those short hooks to the body, tying up the clinch and kneeing away at Kolasinski's body. The recovery and the pace at which Power was fighting was mental. You could see Kolasinski start to break a little bit when he realized that, oh, I've thrown everything at this guy and he's still in my face, and actually he's hitting me really fucking hard. Kolasinski jumped Gilly at one point, which was quite opportunistic because he didn't have the angle nor the hand position, and Power just escaped and sat on top. There was a triangle attempt from Kolasinski, Power just tossing his legs to the side, passing guard, and then just landing some clubbing shots on the ground. Towards the end of the round, elbows over the top, winging hooks, straight shots to the body, knees to the head, mental output from Power. Like to still be cognizant of what's going on in the cage after what he absorbed at the start of the round, crazy. Like to even just survive, to then turn aggressor within that sequence is mental. To then go on and win the round because you've just put a conclusive beat down on your opponent is insane. And I think, 155 pounds, if it didn't have a contender in James Power before Cage Warriors 172, it certainly does now. Round two lasted a handful of seconds. The first strike was a head kick attempt that I think landed as a counter knee. I haven't actually, maybe this is bad for me, and I probably should have rewatched a bunch of replays, but it looked to me in real time there's a head kick that kind of turned into a counter knee that dropped Kolasinski. Power followed up with punches, and referee stepped in. Just a brutal KO from James Power, an absurd fight, an absurd first round. Really at a loss for words. Even talking about it now, I'm still struggling to kind of formulate just how mental it was. It will definitely be up there in performance of the year for me for James Power. It will definitely be up there round of the year if I throw one of those up in the awards show, which I haven't done to date, but I might just to be able to talk about this one again. Crazy from James Power, one of my favorite fighters at 155 pounds. Uh, he's in title contention, guys. It's as simple as that. But for Daniel Kolasinski, I want to see this guy again because he's, his pace was there throughout the fight. It did look like he wilted a little bit, but who wouldn't? But clearly he's got some serious power, and he's got some serious pace as well in him. So I'm sure, and I hope that they'll fit him into another card. But yeah, for James Power, title shot, I think probably in the next year or so, he'll probably be right there. It's a very competitive division though. But James Power versus George Hardwick, November 23rd. Who says no? Because I don't. Imagine that Harry Hardwick versus Vucenic and George Hardwick versus James Power. I think I would just spontaneously combust. I think that'd be such a sick fight, and maybe something we'll end up seeing. So we'll swiftly move on. We had Kennedy Freeman versus Giselle Libanio. Libanio, real unknown, guys. I'm not gonna, pull the wool over your eyes. I really didn't know who she was coming into this. Saw some highlights. 5 fights as an amateur and as a pro, only one loss, 2-1 coming into it. A banger, really. Like, people look at Brazilians and think submission artists, but actually someone who's probably more prolific on the feet. In round one, Kennedy Freeman, of course, 4-0, had one of the best KOs of 2023, which made my shortlist for finish of the year. In her return to MMA, no less, she'd gone quite a few years without fighting. Goes without saying, we always mention it, daughter of UK MMA legend Ian Freeman, first ever Brit to fight in the UFC, first person to deal Frank Mir the person who dealt Frank Mir his first ever loss. So a lot of history there, but Kennedy came into this fight, I would say, a pretty sizable favorite. And in round one, it was a really disappointing start to the fight, I would say, not for Kennedy, but just from an audience perspective. Um, Libanio really just held Freeman against the fence for 5 minutes. Whenever they broke, Freeman was landing the better shots, cracking Libanio with a left hand, short elbow in the clinch. But Libanio was just holding her there, and it was one of those where she had overwhelming control, but she did absolutely nothing with it. I scored it 10-9 to Freeman. She's landed the better shots, had the damage in that round. In round two, what I love to see, and clearly the corner had something to say to Freeman, because while the fight ended up in the clinch again, Freeman was more actively defending it, framing off the head, knee into the body. She had a straight shot in there, which really stung Libanio. I felt any time that they disengaged and went into the middle of the cage, uh, Freeman had it all. Like, counter knee to the body was nice. Left hand was automatic all fight long. Like that left hand was just landing at will. Knees to the head of Libanio against the fence. Freeman looked so good in round two. There was a supposed groin shot in there, which, Goddard told Rich Mitchell was a clean shot. Hard to tell, really. Even on the replays, it felt a bit harsh on Libano. But either way, Freeman cracked her with a left hook when the fight resumed, and really controlled. In round two, you really saw Freeman in total control, in my opinion. Whereas round one, she might have been a bit not gun shy, but she kind of accepted the position. I think in the clinch, Libano was strong as a bull. I can imagine in that first round, but in the second round, Freeman found her pace and found her rhythm. And I had it 2018 going into the third. But this fight and this card, guys, didn't really like seeing fights go to decision. And Kennedy Freeman realized that because in round three, it was just absolute mayhem from Freeman, striking to the body in the clinch, short uppercuts. Libano was trying to do the whole fence control, and she just couldn't. Like Freeman was just stronger, more active. She was piecing Libano up. 2-3 combination was gorgeous. They started trading strikes, and this is when Libano lost the fight. The minute Libano was like, "Oh crap, I can't hold her here. I'm gonna have to fight her." Once they got out into the middle and started trading strikes, you could tell Freeman was just the stronger of the two, the more powerful. Left hook wobbled Libano. Freeman rushed her with an overhand right and then dropped her with a left hand. A stunning finish, a third round knockout. 5-0 now with back-to-back finishes. I think for me, if they keep matching her up with these random fighters, and it feels harsh to say that, but you're matching her up against people who are just coming in and she's gonna beat the crap out of them because she's so good. For me, I think the most logical thing is you dust the cobwebs off that bantamweight Cage Warriors belt, you dust it off, and on that November 23rd card, I know I'm putting all the fights on there, but I just feel like when you've got Newcastle adjacent fighters, you've got to do it. You can have three title fights on that card, and one of them, in my opinion, you do Kennedy Freeman 5-0 now after winning versus Jasmine Favero 3-0. You do that for the Cage Warriors bantamweight belt, November 23rd. I think you get that booked ASAP. Favero's one of the best female prospects, in my opinion. Certainly one of the best in Cage Warriors, which there aren't many female fighters, but she's really, really good. And Kennedy Freeman's just on a run right now, like back to back knockouts. She looks really good at 135. It's a no brainer for me. So I'd love to see that fight happen, and I hope they get that booked. Leon Hill versus Tommy Hawthorne is the next fight we'll talk about. Leon Hill looking to bounce back after his first round submission loss to Ryan Davis back in October. It was a loss that snapped a 6-fight winning streak for him. But Hill's an active finisher, rarely ever sees the scorecards. So you favoured him coming into this against Tommy Hawthorne, who is a very good prospect in his own right, a really, really good wrestler. Uh, Nice to see him finally make his Cage Warriors debut after 2 fight cancellations. But it goes to show how highly the promotion think of Hawthorne because he'd been matched up against Patrizzi and then Davis, Ryan Davis, of course, and now Hill. So obviously someone that they held in quite high regard. Leon Hill in this fight, he looked tremendous. He was getting walked down by Hawthorne early in the fight with the jabs, uh, roundhouse to the body, and Hawthorne was cracking Hill to the body early. But then once Hill got the jab going, he was snapping Hawthorne's head back. The takedown attempts from Hill were a bit labored against someone like Hawthorne. Like Hawthorne's just a tremendous grappler, and he just kept countering every time the takedown would come. He'd stuff it, punish it with a couple of knees to the midsection. But Hill's jab, whenever he doubled it, was mental. There was a head kick from Hill that Hawthorne just walked through as if it was nothing, and that thing looked like it could have stopped a lot of people that night. The jab to the head, jab to the body really was the story of the fight for Leon Hill. And I scored it 10-9 for him in the first round. In the second round, I loved that Hawthorne was doing well to enter range, but whenever he got really close, Hill would just tie him up, get into that dirty boxing collar tie, and uppercuts, short shots within that clinch. So good. The short elbow from Hill in the clinch as well was tidy as hell. Hill's such a good technician. But what led to the end of this fight was Hawthorne going for like a sacrifice throw, a takedown, and landing on his back, which was, you know, up there for terrible fight IQ moments. But I figure he might have been tired, and it's just one of those things you do out of desperation when you're extremely labored, and you're just trying to get the fight to a position you believe is advantageous. But Hill took his back, choked him out. That might be Leon Hill's best performance, in my opinion. Just purely all of the his striking arsenal, and the way that he was striking in this fight was so sharp, so good. The snapping jab, mixing the jab to the head and the body, the uppercuts in the collar tie, the roundhouse kick to the body, just great technique, and the finish was pure instinct. Leon Hill's 7-2 now at 155 pounds. I think he's always going to be a player. It's good to see him on a card that isn't a doubling card, because I think that he should be, he has been very active over the last 2 years. So let's keep it that way. Let's get him on other cards that aren't just the island ones, because I think that, give it another year or two, Leon Hill might be in title contention. All right, and I promise I'm not going to speed through, but it should be made known that pretty much every fight from here on out was a first round finish. So I might not have a great deal to talk about. We'll start with Arthurs Laysans versus Chasen Blair. Chasen Blair, one of the more exciting prospects out of the San Diego scene, and now he's fought twice outside of the US, which is nice. It's good to see him fighting in the UK. I always say that get these guys over to the UK, get them fighting some really good fighters, because the pool in the US isn't as, obviously the pool is massive and that might be part of the problem. But the roster can sometimes be a bit hit and miss. Whereas you bring them over to Europe, you can put them against some more experienced veterans, give them different looks. And Chasen Blair, obviously, like I said, pretty exciting prospect. Laysan's made his Cage Warriors debut here, 9-7 as a pro. Only seen the scorecards twice, and he certainly wasn't going to see it in this fight. Chasen Blair had a nice double jab early to initiate the grappling and get the mat return. Went straight into half guard, then transitioned to mount with 2.5 minutes left. Laysan's turned into him to try and escape in a really explosive manner, and Chasen Blair snatched the arm and sunk in the armbar. Just a sublime, sublime submission win. Really slick. I actually had at Invincible Wheel on Twitter tweet me, and she said that the Chasen Blair transition to the armbar was the slickest thing she's ever seen, and she was at the card. So that's even more praise for Chasen Blair. For me, I have to agree. It's definitely up there. Snatched it up so quickly. Just it was a really explosive exit from Arthur's Laysans, and it felt like he was going to escape. And Chasen Blair, just the wherewithal, the quick wit to just grab that arm and crank on it. Just a beautiful setup, a beautiful transition from him. He's an exceptional talent. He's 5-2. He wears his heart on his sleeve when he fights. I love his grappling. He's got power on the feet. Another fun guy at 155 pounds. Hope they continue to put him on these European cards, because we can see him against these grizzled vets like Laysans, and we can see him against much higher caliber opposition, I think, as well. The main card opener here was between Aiden Lee and Josh Abraham. Aiden Lee, 6 years away from the Yellow Gloves, fighting in Bellator and other promotions. Last time we saw him in Cage Warriors was his loss to Dean Truman, which was for the vacant featherweight belt. He now rejoins the promotion 11-8. Josh Abraham returning as well to Cage Warriors after 5 years away. Had a pretty big hiatus from MMA between 2019 and 2023, but seems to be back, in a more regular manner now. Prolific finisher of fights. This one was a really cool matchup from Ian Dean and the Cage Warriors matchmakers, because you had the story there. Two guys who have been fighting, but they've been away from the promotion for so long. Aiden Lee, someone who, we would see typically in title contention, that caliber of fighter, and Josh Abraham, just a really exciting banger of a fighter. I had this, tip this to be my personal fight of the night. I wouldn't say it reached that height, because Aiden Lee was so bloody good. It didn't give Abraham much time to contest him, really. Another first round finish here. Aiden Lee looked really good. Straight left hand. Every time Abraham tried to close the distance, Aiden Lee was just landing some really good straight lefts. The jab as well. Abraham looked like he was starting to find the timing on the check hook, but once Lee was conscious of that, he did well to just catch a single leg, take Abraham down, where he had the advantage on the ground, obviously. There was a guillotine attempt from Lee, who tried to roll through, switched to the Darce choke, then Abraham wriggled out. Abraham then tried to use a heel hook to scramble out of position. So there was some awesome scrambles within that sequence, within that grappling sequence. But eventually, Aiden Lee found his way to the back, sunk in both hooks, switched the body triangle, locked in the rear naked choke. An incredible return for him after 6 years away from Cage Warriors. Improves to 12-8. Someone who's so experienced as well, like Aiden Lee, who has fought for the title as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of quickly inserts himself into the title picture at 155 pounds. Just great to see him back. For Josh Abraham, I'm certain he'll fight again for the promotion. He's such an exciting fighter, such a fun fighter. This was a really difficult match for him to come back to against a veteran like Aiden Lee. So I'm sure they'll match him up a bit more accordingly next time, and we'll probably see more of a contest, because I think that outside of the scrambles on the ground, Aiden Lee was the better fighter in this, and I think it showed. All right, time to rattle through some of these prelim fights. Jack Humphries versus Joao dos Santos was the prelim headliner. Dos Santos, a total unknown for me, again, 1-1 as a pro. Jack Humphries, a guy I've been talking about for a long time. 10-3 as an amateur, smashed it at the IMAFs, smashed it at Emma as well. This guy is just one to keep an eye on at 135/145 pounds. And I make it very obvious to call out both divisions because he has competed in both. He'll probably settle at 135 in Cage Warriors, but something to keep an eye on. Jack Humphries for me is one of the best prospects in the UK, one of the best up and comers, a tremendous grappler, and just a really smart mixed martial artist who seems destined to do really big things. The calf kick early was good, and Dos Santos was there throughout the fight on the feet, returning fire with the calf kicks. But what I liked about Humphries was really quick left hook, diving straight into the double leg takedown, elbowed away at Dos Santos, body lock to pin him down. You could tell this was a fighter who can just flow on the ground, and he's not just taking you down and holding you there. We talk about exciting prospects, and Muhammad Mokaev is a great example of someone who had a great amateur background. Obviously, it's not really comparable here, but a big criticism of Mokaev in the UFC has been that when he takes people down, he's not throwing any strikes. He's trying to find submissions, but he's not doing as much as he could on the ground. And that's probably a criticism of a lot of fighters of this newer generation. But Humphries he's just a killer, man. Like the minute he gets people on the ground, and the minute he got Dos Santos in the ground here, transitioned straight into mount, elbowing and punching away at Dos Santos, which busted him open. Big ground and pound. Eventually, Dos Santos just turtled up, gave up his back, and Humphries just secured the rear naked choke. 1-0 as a pro. Huge pro debut, in my opinion. I tweeted it after the fight, but I think that he will go right to the very top in MMA. He's a nasty operator on the ground. I think he's just very well rounded. I can't wait to see how his career unfolds. But I am here to it's on record now, and this podcast will live on for a long while. And I'll be interested to see how this pans out. Let's say 5 or 6 years from now. But I do think Jack Humphries will go straight to the very top, not just in the UK. I'm talking like in MMA in general. I'm sure that big things are on the horizon for him. It's like I said, hard to stick your neck out at this point when someone's so green in their career, but I'm really so sure of something, and I'm really sure of Jack Humphries making it all the way one day to the UFC and whatever else, and doing big things there too. We then had the return of Michael Chamu versus Joe Ambler. Chamu, who's fought his MMA almost exclusively in the yellow gloves, 3-4 as a pro, and currently winless in his last 3, which doesn't always look good on a record. But you got to consider who he's been fighting. Guys like Naglis Kanasauskas, guys like Will Curry. You're probably going to lose those when you're so green in your career as Chamu. Joe Ambler, a really fun prospect. 1-1 coming into this, but fought some interesting names at amateur level where he went 8-2. Fought someone, for example, Sean Clancy Jr., who folks will be really aware of as one of the best prospects in Cage Warriors right now. Um, Making his Cage Warriors debut coming into this, and it didn't last very long for him. Michael Chamu just swung wildly, as you always expect Chamu to do. Um, but the way that he finished this fight is something that's quite new to Chamu, because he drops Ambler with a glancing like roundhouse to the body, but it's really just the toes that connect on Ambler. Um, Completely shut him down. He turns around just in that debilitating pain that body shots put you in, the way they freeze you up. And Chamu just Ambler shoots out of desperation, which makes sense because Chamu hits like an absolute mule. And in shooting, Chamu switched to front headlock, power guillotine, and just draws the submission out of Ambler. One of those where Chamu was definitely the underdog coming into it, but you just love to see guys like Chamu win. He's one of the good guys in the sport. He put his hands on Ambler all round long, stung him with those toes to the body, and then drew the tap. First career submission win to improve to 4-4. Joe Ambler, one of those that it happens. I'm sure we'll see him again. Tom Wright versus Joe Fields was another sleeper pick for me for a fight of the night. I didn't think it would last longer than a round, and it didn't last longer than 2 minutes. Tom Wright made quite the impression last year in his Cage Warriors debut, where he steamrolled Jimmy Quinn. It was one of the, coming off the fastest knockout we'd ever seen in Cage Warriors history. And Wright just very much a kill or be killed type is Wright at amateur level and at pro level. Joe Fields, a big prospect out of MFA, which is where the Hardwick brothers fight out of, had a very good run as an amateur and came into this fight 1-0 as a pro, making his Cage Warriors debut. A savvy finisher of fights, either on the feet or on the ground, which we saw here. I like Tom Wright's shift in left hook and feinting the kicks up the middle to force Fields backwards. Fields clocked Wright with a right hand, rushed him, and then got clocked back. That was a big moment because you felt that Fields couldn't really get overzealous, and Fields immediately was like, "Oh, okay, cool. You probably hit pretty hard. Let me take you down." And it's a beautiful double leg to get Tom Wright down. Um, Body triangle. Wright then turned into Fields to try and potentially get on top, and in doing so, Fields connected his hands and secured the rear naked choke to draw the tap from Tom Wright. Someone worth keeping an eye on for sure at 135 pounds. We then had some big boys. Albert Serpetti versus Charles Joyner, 6'6" versus 6'8". Serpetti, I keep some notes before the fight, and I wrote that Serpetti is likely a warm body for Charles Joyner, 1-3, 3-fight losing streak. Joyner 2-1 as a pro, very good strike and base, and both wins via KO. Comes into this and it goes exactly as you'd expect, but with the added bonus of a fucking tremendous finish from Charles Joyner. Serpetti had a high kick early, and Joyner just clobbered him with some counter knees to the body. This guy was kneeing to the body early, and that was pretty much all she wrote. Joyner was trying to get Serpetti down and crushed him with a couple more knees that completely floored Serpetti. A nasty finish for the Aussie, who improves to 3-1. Yeah, go and see that finish if you haven't. It's a knee to the solar plexus. It's not even it's not even right there in the midsection. It's potentially something broken in there. Like I don't know, like maybe he broke a rib or something. Like that was a nasty area to target for Joyner, and he just completely just crumbled Serpetti. I'm not usually a guy that gets excited over light heavyweights and heavyweights, but Joyner looks like an athlete at 205 and hits like a truck. So be happy to see him in there again anytime. Our only decision of the card saw Jackson Clark face Faudel Bentayeb. Jackson Clark making his professional debut, and Bentayeb 4-4 as a pro. So quite a jump up. If you're making your pro debut fighting a guy who's about to have his ninth fight, it's a pretty big jump, especially when you've only had 6 amateur fights as Jackson Clark. But I scored it 30-27 to Jackson Clark. I thought he looked really good. Bentayeb fought at an extremely high pace in the first round, and that might have caused some struggle for some fighters, and especially when you're making your pro debut, you've got those jitters. But Jackson Clark I think the best thing about him in this fight is he remained calm against a more experienced opponent who came at him at a high pace, and he won all 3 rounds, in my opinion, did Jackson Clark. I liked his left hand was really good in this fight. Whenever the fight went to the ground, especially in the third, the elbows and side control, going knee on belly to transition to mount. Bentayev could have probably been finished at the end of the fight. 2 spinning back elbows from Clark, but he ate them pretty well. Jackson Clark 1-0 now as a pro. Someone I'm quite excited to see again. Seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. Very exciting and fought extremely well against a almost a veteran in Faudel Bentayev. And last but certainly not least, we had our prelim opener, which was between Jordan O'Neill and Todoris Serdes, the Greek international. Jordan O'Neill, really exciting prospect. Started his amateur career 0-3, but since then, both as an amateur and as a pro, hasn't lost a single fight, rattling off 6 straight, now 7 straight, because he would go on to finish his opponent within a minute and a half and improve to 3-0. Not much happened here, really, with the first impactful moment of the fight. So there's tried the body kick. O'Neill blocked it and returned fire with his own, almost like a switch roundhouse to the body to knock Cerdes out. A big prospect for the Irish is Jordan O'Neill, and just a fantastic promotional debut. One of 2 body shot KOs in this card, but technically 4 fights in total ended with the body shot setting up the final sequence. So there was a pretty fun moment where Brad Wharton, obviously Cage Warriors commentator, tweeted that if we get 4 body shot finishes, he'll let Charles Joyner knee him to the body. And Denny Rants on Twitter tweeted me after the fight, and he said, "Is there an argument to be made that body shots led to 4 finishes tonight?" I think Brad should start, you know, icing up that stomach, making it a bit numb, because I think that Charles Joyner should probably land a couple of knees on him. Technically, not 4 body shot finishes, but definitely 4 fights that were finished because of the body shot leading to the final strikes. Of course, the fights I'm referring to are the Harry Hardwick fight, the Michael Chamu fight as well, and then obviously Charles Joyner and Jordan O'Neill with legitimate body shot finishes. So that's yeah, that's all she wrote. I think for Brad, I think next card we should get a Brad cam and we should fly out Charles Joyner to the US and see what happens there. But guys, a tremendous card in Newcastle. I don't think it could have gone any better. Um, when you get these cards, you've got to cherish them. 12 fights, 11 finishes, 7 first round stoppages. We've I did some stats and some research because that's what I like doing. And then we've only had 16 cards in Cage Warriors history. That's all stretches all the way back to 2004 or 2002. Yeah, 2002. We've only had 16 cards that have had 7 first round finishes or more. Obviously, we've had some crazy cards that have had 12 first round finishes, but they were cards with like 20 fights on them. So yeah, this is definitely the best card we'll probably see this year. Props to Harry Hardwick again, a tremendous moment for UK MMA, and props to everyone who had their hands raised on this card. It was a really fun one for especially for the people in Newcastle who got to go. The fact that they're going to throw another card on there on the 23rd of November, you guys are some lucky gits, so enjoy it. So if you made it this far, I'd like to kindly ask that you give us a good review. Like retweets on Twitter always help to kind of expand the knowledge of this podcast around the MMA community, but also wherever you're listening to this on YouTube, you can drop a like, you can comment. Uh, Apple Podcasts, you can go in there, you can drop a review. I think I've only got 1 review on there, so if someone wants to do a nice thing, that would be great. You've also got Spotify, where I think you can do star ratings, and wherever you're listening to this on, there's always an opportunity. You can also just share it on social media, Twitter, Instagram. Anything you can do is helpful, just to help build the podcast. I don't make a penny on it, and it's more of just a passion project. But it'd be great to see the numbers go up and see a bigger audience reached, because I think that we're doing something quite unique here, and we're shining a light on UK MMA, not just from a here's what happened, but also from a technical perspective. So if you are feeling rather nice, then please do a nice thing. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you all again. Cage Warriors 173 on the 7th of June in San Diego.